So, David, your day job sounds fascinating. Tell us all about what you do.
Um, well, hi. I'm a sculpture conservator. I basically specialise in church monuments. That's my passion, if you like. And I run a small firm called Skillington Workshop. We're based in the Midlands in Grantham. So yeah, I spend much of my life wandering around looking at monuments, doing various sort of conservation repairs and whatever's necessary to ensure their preservation.
How did you get into doing that?
Okay, well, it's quite a long story. I trained initially as an archaeologist, and I discovered a passion for sort of archaeology and sort of digging holes in the ground at quite a young age. And I went on to study archaeology and archaeological conservation at university. I ended up working at the Museum of London as a site conservator, and we had to do some work to some polychrome stone sculpture that we uncovered. The conservator who came along to look at that was a chap called Seamus Hannah, who I kept in touch with. And when my contract at the Museum of London finished, I ended up going to work for Seamus, working mainly on church monuments, and that was well over 30 years ago, and that was it really.
How did you first get involved at Bow-upon-Trent?
What the first stage of the conservation process is for a conservator's report to be commissioned. So we will look at and try to understand what the causes of any deterioration are, and take well, we try to tackle these reports in a fairly scientific way. So we'll know what questions we've got to ask, work out ways that we can answer the questions, and then come up with a well-considered treatment proposal. So I do this sort of thing quite a lot, and because it's pretty much on our doorstep, I guess, I was approached by the parish. Well, it seems like a long time ago now, but before anybody had heard of coronavirus, and ended up doing my site survey just at the start of the pandemic, and we were able to turn the report around fairly quickly because we were quite quiet at the time, and then went on to implement the recommendations.
It's amazing to think how much medieval sculpture is on people's doorsteps that they would never dream was there. They go to museums to see that kind of thing, when actually our parish churches are full of this kind of thing.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you on that, and not just medieval sculpture either. I mean, I think particularly the before the era of sort of Georgian and Victorian public sculpture, during those sort of like the 17th and 18th centuries, it's the best place to see sculpture really is in churches.
For attendees of the Church Monument Society event this summer to view the alabaster, how would you describe the monument?
Work by others, in particular Sally Badham, has established that it's a very important early alabaster effigy. It's of a priest lying recumbent in prayer in a recess in the south wall of the south aisle. Until fairly recently, it had been largely obscured by I think by an organ, so it hasn't necessarily received all the attention it deserved, and it's absolutely filthy. But straight away, when looking at it, we could see beneath the sort of build-up of dirt, and it's sort of the odd knock and scrape it's understandably had. Straight away you can see it's a wonderful piece of sculpture.
And how do you tell that it's a priest?
it, I'm laughing because his hairstyle's not, in a sense, not that dissimilar to mine. He's got a tonsured head, very obviously so. So straight away we know that he's an ecclesiastic, um, and then of course the dress that he's wearing, the sort of chasuble and the general sort of priestly clothes make it reasonably obvious. He had at his feet he had a dog, and yeah, so again, very often military figures are dressed in armour and quite often have a lion at their feet, and the dogs tend to be more of a secular footrest, if you like, for either priests or indeed for ladies.
So when you first saw the monument, what were the recommendations you made for its conservation?
Well, we knew that it was part of a wider scheme of work, and that the aspiration was that it should come out of its recess to allow other works to be carried out. So one of the things that we looked at was there were some issues with excessive damp, and so I wanted to look at the recess in the context of the wider church environment. And actually, if you look in the back wall and look at the pattern of the masonry, you can see that there's some odd an odd distribution of vertical joints. And what you're looking at is the back of the buttress on the external wall. Those stones actually link directly into the back wall of the recess. So in terms of managing the wider environment and keeping moisture down in the recess itself, we had to make sure that the masonry outside, including the buttress, was neatly pointed and shedding water properly, and of course that the drainage was well attended to, and all that took part as part of the broader contract. As far as the effigy itself was concerned, it was mainly a question of cleaning and some minor repairs. We spotted a few things, such as the head on the dog was at a fairly sort of jaunty angle, not looking very natural, and we could see it had been repaired before. So I wanted to take a closer look at that as well. And of course we know through other examples that quite often alabaster effigies and indeed medieval effigies were originally painted. Although we couldn't see any signs of paint on the sort of quite dirty effigy in place, we knew that there's a chance that there could be surviving polychromy on the more hidden and protected areas. So we were, I guess, quite excited to look out for that when we had the opportunity to take the effigy out of the recess.
Right, so can you walk us through exactly what was done? How do you go about tackling a conservation project like that?
The first thing we had to do was to obviously to actually very carefully take the effigy out of the recess. So it was a case of in fact there wasn't any particular mortar bedding holding him down onto quite a sort of solid Victorian base that he is sat on. So we were able to tentatively place some long levers and lifting bars and just find a suitably safe place to get if you like, a large glorified crowbar underneath, and just to lift up one end a little bit so we could start slipping in a little softwood batten. We have to be very careful where we place these, because obviously things placed in the wrong location under a weak spot can create points loading, and the last thing we want to do is literally break his back by putting stresses in the wrong place. So it's quite a sort of sensitive sort of operation. So we progressively lift him up in this way, getting these wooden runners underneath, such that we've got access to slide him out of the recess. That was quite tricky because there wasn't an awful lot of headroom to lift him up, and because he's in a recess, we couldn't use a block and tackle or anything like that to physically lift him out. So we had to sort of slide him out of place. Now when I first started doing this, we used to use sheets of hardboard. So we cut strips from hardboard and get the shiny face, and put two little strips on top of each other, shiny face to shiny face, and it's amazing how you can move a really heavy piece of sculpture like an effigy, and it will just slide almost with one hand on these little skids, and you don't need much headroom or much clearance to do that. What we use nowadays is Teflon strips. They work even better than that. I should say that with the hardboard, we used to use graphite powder as well, which we don't have to use with the Teflon strips. They just slide. So that's what we did. We managed to ease him out of the recess and onto a trolley, so that we could carefully move him, in fact, to the chancel, where we could get good light and access all round and examine him further.
Did that reveal any more issues?
Yes, we found part of him which was actually hidden in the back of the to his rear in the recess. We found a sort of like a structural crack, if you like, going across one corner, which, in fact, we'd spotted that as we were taking him out, and that meant that we were even more careful in terms of handling him, and we could put some if necessary, we can put some temporary braces and splints and straps to give him a bit more strength. But we realised that we were going to have to make some kind of a repair to deal with that, and we ended up putting in two hidden stainless steel dowels to so set in resin. You wouldn't see them now, but they're in there, and we've recorded them, so they'll strengthen and reinforce that weak area. We found a couple of minor areas needing a little bit of sort of consolidation, and where alabaster was sort of flaking off. But of course, the most exciting thing was that once we started cleaning him, we found in the folds of his clothes on the rear face, we started finding these wonderfully intricate little traces of colour, you know, gold and red and black in particular. Really exciting.
How did you manage to reveal them without sort of over cleaning and accidentally taking that away?
Well, that's a very good question, you know, particularly with regard to the cleaning. And I think this is one of the reasons why so much colour has been lost, because if you were to start cleaning a little bit too aggressively or with water, some of these colours are slightly fugitive in water. You know, the colour will soon start disappearing and flaking off. So what we tend to use to clean the wherever there's any indication of paint, we tend to just use a cotton wool swab with a very small amount of deionized water, and we will literally just roll it across the surface so that we don't put any pressure on the you know, on the paint, so that's how we would clean it. But we also look out for any signs of paint which is flaking off, and in that case we might have to consolidate it, which is normally done just by introducing a small amount of typically acrylic resin, maybe by a syringe, just around any flaking edges, just to secure it.
Can you tell us about the patterning that you found, and tell us more about investigating the colours?
Well, we could see enough to know that there was a very intricate pattern. It may be that what we're looking at is an intricate border to maybe a plainer a generally plainer garment. But I suspect the whole thing might have been beautifully patterned. And of course, you know, when we see the fairly smooth surfaces on the alabaster, we sometimes forget that the intricacy would have been, the real intricacy would have been added by the colour, which has been largely lost. So yes, it's, you know, some really interesting clues there, but there's not enough to be able to reconstruct the whole pattern. Straight away when I looked at it, we felt that it needed some further and deeper understanding of what the pigments were. We had advised the PCC that they should maybe seek some analysis from a specialist. In fact, they did that directly. Yeah, so we know a bit more about the pigments.
What other kind of techniques were involved in this project?
The repair of the dog's head was quite an interesting sort of case in point. It had been previously repaired by with plaster of Paris. I'll come back to plaster of Paris in a minute, but with a lead plug. So what had happened is somebody drilled through the top of the dog's head. And just poured lead in, and that would have held it in conjunction with the plaster. But once the plaster had broken down, and I guess people had tried to sort of twist and move the dog's head over the years, it's quite tempting, I suppose, when you see that it's been repaired and to see if it's loose. And the lead isn't particularly rigid, so. And then of course we noticed that it was at the wrong angle. It didn't align properly either, and that must have been how it had been repaired before. So to get the lead out, we tend to start off by drilling it. Lead is incredibly difficult actually to drill, even though it's soft. Drill bits just tend to sort of snarl up in it. So we tend to use the very judiciously placed sort of like stainless steel drill bits just to sort of free it up a bit and allow us to work it such that it's loose enough that we can actually then ease the head off. The plaster of Paris we mechanically removed. Plaster of Paris is interesting because it's basically gypsum, and of course that's what the alabaster is. It's and in fact alabaster is sourced from as nodules within gypsum quarries from the gypsum which is being compressed. So in terms of compatibility, it's quite a good material to use for repair fills, and that's indeed what we went on to do subsequent crack fills using.
So how many of you did it take, and how long did a project like this take?
The project was sort of carried out in various stages to fit around the requirements of the main contractors who were doing the general sort of refurbishment work. So we had to take it out at the start of their project, so they've got access, and put it back at the end. In the middle, the cleaning of the effigy probably took just under 2 weeks, and then probably about another week carrying out the various repairs and the treatment of the polychromy and the repair of the dog's head. Something else that we did was looking at the back of the recess. We felt very strongly that the existing cement mortar in there needed to be removed because it was restricting the ability of the stonework to breathe, if you like, to manage its moisture content. So we made we looked at the types of lime mortar that we could see had been there historically, and repointed the back of the niche with lime mortar, which was sort of, if you grouted and tamped deeply into the open joints. And then when we put the effigy back, we made sure that we we were able to put him back, so there's just a little bit further out than he had been before, so he wasn't in direct contact with the wall, so that we'd got a little bit more scope for air movement and less direct transfer of moisture.
So Sally Badham identified the priest as perhaps John de Belton of the late 1340s or 50s, making it potentially the oldest known alabaster effigy of a priest.
The evidence for the dating is going to be, down to the sort of like the stylistic and the details of the carving, and I guess the identification as John de Belton is going to be to a certain extent circumstantial, but of course there are situations where there aren't very many options, and it's you can be pretty certain, even though you haven't got an inscription or anything to absolutely substantiate it without doubt. But no, I've seen nothing to contradict Sally's hypothesis.
It sounded a very collaborative project. You've mentioned other contractors, and who was involved? I presume the commission was coming from the PCC, the Procurement.
Yeah, well, it was Anne Heathcote who was very closely involved. We did a lot of, particularly at the survey stage. She was our point of contact at the PCC. But I think we must have met about half the parish, during the works. Lots of people were very interested in what was going on, and of course we had many chats with the vicar during the works and this sort of thing. Lots of people very interested. The contractors who were absolutely brilliant, actually. And of course there were Bridens. I think they come from Matlock, if I can remember rightly, but they were very good. And of course we're all working during these COVID under COVID restrictions, and so we were quite careful with the number of people on site at any one time and this sort of thing. James Boone, the architect, of course, we worked closely with him, and from our point of view, we had, I think, during the works, we probably had probably about 5 of us involved. That there are a dozen of us in the firm altogether, but much of the cleaning, I have to mention Laura Parker, who did most of the cleaning of the effigy and worked on the polychromy. And then it was myself and 2 Simons, Simon Naden and Simon Ebbs, who moved the effigy in and out and did the structural repairs.
As you mentioned, the parish got very interested, and I believe the media also got very interested. Can you tell us a bit about those reactions and how that played out?
Yeah, well, it's great. We ended up having to, what I was asked to quite short notice, as these things typically are, to come and give an interview for the BBC at the church, and that was great. And I think it's really important that we get the word, if you like, what we're doing and of conservation and why we're doing it and why it's important. The more we can get this out in the in the media and share what we're doing with the wider world, the better. I'm all for it. And it's very easy to find yourself working in your own little world and being too busy to sort of share what you're doing. But that was great, and it was a great opportunity for a bit of media coverage as well. Besides, there's all these different angles to the what people have done and their importance, and how we how and why we should conserve their memorials. The cultural values, if you like, of what it is that we're conserving. I mean, it's a fundamental principle of conservation. You've got to understand what it is you're conserving and what's important about it.
How did the pandemic conditions alter the way the project played out?
Because we work all over the country, the problems, some of the problems we've had is where it's required lots of people working closely together. And there are only very limited times when we had to work, for short times, for short periods within 2 meters of one another on this job. Most of it could be done by one person, typically Laura, working, in a safe distance from anybody else. We haven't had to worry about accommodation and staying away. And as I say, the Bridens, the contractors, were very good and allowed us the space to work without getting in anybody else's way. So, as far as the pandemic's concerned, this was a perfect job from our point of view to be carrying out during the pandemic.
Now that the project has been completed, how is the effigy looking? Is it back in its original spot?
Yes, it's gone back to where it was before, same alignment. So, we've still got his feet to the east, which is quite interesting in a sense, because there might have been the temptation to have turned him around so his head was to the east, so that you could see more clearly the polychromy. But of course, the liturgy dictates that the heads to the west, and we've managed that. That's why we've got a mirror in the back of the recess, so that you can actually still view the colour. But no, I think he looks absolutely great, and now that his importance is better understood as well, hopefully it's something that people can enjoy for many years to come.